And coming from a family like Ahaz had come from, you wouldn't expect that. We know what his father Jotham stood for, and Grandpa Uzziah was nothing less. So when I tell you that Ahaz worshipped idols and not the one true God, it was not because Ahaz had never heard it. When I tell you that he sacrificed his own son in the fire, it was not because his father had done the same to him. And when I tell you that Isaiah the prophet went to Ahaz telling him that he was headed in the wrong direction and all he had to do for the survival of Judah is to worship God, and Ahaz would have no part in it, it wasn't because Ahaz had never seen his father do it. It was something internal. It was something inside Ahaz that he battled that was never recorded, never put on paper. Something that had never been clearly pinpointed. And all I can tell you today that it was not because Ahaz had never heard it. And I stand before you today, this great church, and you wonderful people. And if you walk out of this place and proclaim that Jesus Christ is not Lord, it won't be because you've never heard the truth. If you walk out today and say, I don't believe this anymore, it won't be because you didn't hear it preached. And if you walk out and say, you know what, I'm not going back to that church, I don't believe it any longer, I'm not going to live my life this way, I'm not going to put boundaries in my life, I'm not going to put guidelines, that's all right. But know this, it won't be because you never heard it. It breaks my heart to watch people who have known this truth proclaim another way to salvation. I was talking to a preacher the other day, and preachers in our generation, I'm watching them, wonderful, talented speakers, anointed men of God, and they're stepping out and they're walking the other direction. Things that we stood for years, things that were preached in our spirit, things that birthed in us at an altar at a young age. All of a sudden, I don't know what gets into somebody's mind that knows the truth and turns 180 and walks the other direction. But all I can say to this, to my generation, it wasn't because we didn't have men and women that paved the path, that said this is the only way, this is the truth. It won't be because of that. So Ahaz, he was taught better. He knew better. And when he died, when it came time to honor this king Ahaz, the people said, I don't care who his granddaddy was. I don't care who his father was. His father had nothing to do with his reign. And they took Ahaz to Jerusalem and would not place him in the sepulchre of kings because Ahaz was not about his father's business. He was about his own business. And I don't want to get to the end of my life. I don't want to get to the end of my life and my children say Daddy was about his business. I don't want my friends and the people in my town, in my city, in my area that I'm trying to impact. I don't want them to say Corey was selfish. He had one motive, and that was his own personal gain. I don't want this community, I don't want this world to mark me as a self-promoter. But I dream of one day being buried with kings. I dream of the impact that I make live far after my death. You can be ordinary if you want, but as for me and my family, we're going to serve the Lord. As for me and my family, we're going to be apostolic. We're going to impact this world. We're going to preach a message, and we're not going to back down from it. I looked at Amelia. I told our church this today when I'm preaching. I don't know if you can tell I'm wore out. But I told them, I looked at Amelia when we were watching the ball jump, and we were going into 2012, and I grabbed her up close to me and I said, 2012 is going to be the best year that we've ever seen. And I believe that. And I believe it can be the best year that you've ever seen. And I believe we can make some impacts. We can leave a mark on this community. And we can walk over into 2012 and say, this is our year. We're not backing down. We're not backing down from false doctrine. I'm not leaving this truth, but I'm going to stand behind my pastor. And we're going to walk into our destiny. We preach the opportunity to preach a lot of places. And not saying that boastfully, but I have no idea. I got in church one day, and it seems like the next day I was preaching out, and God really blessed me with a lot of opportunities that I don't feel like sometimes that I should have had that opportunity. And I stand at pulpits and in preachers' living rooms and sit and eat at supper tables with people that I'm sitting there thinking, there is no way I have not sacrificed enough to be able to have these opportunities. But nevertheless, we get to do that. We travel this country and preach in a lot of different states across this great nation. And I'll find myself sitting down still chatting about the ministry of T.W. Barnes. I don't know if does anybody know who T.W. Barnes is in this place. He was a prophet, a very well-known prophet in our organization. As a matter of fact, he was in the UPC, the United Pentecostal Church. And I still find myself, I've never met this man, never heard him preach, been to his church a few times after he was dead, but he's been dead now for some 10 years. But yet we're still talking about him, and he's still affecting lives, and he's still inspiring preachers. Right. And I was thinking one day when we were sitting there talking, I talked to him in numerous places, numerous pastors, and they still talk about it. I would love to have a ministry like T.W. Barnes. And all of a sudden you can start talking about him, still telling stories that God has fulfilled in his life, and the faith level will start rising, and people will be wanting to pray, and people will be, that's what kind of legacy I want to leave. Come on. I pray to God that after I die 10, 15, 20 years later, people are saying, you remember that young man come through preach for us? You remember that young man that came to our house? I hope people live on and saying, hey, you remember that time that Porterfield boy and his wife had us over for supper, and they spoke with us and they talked with us? Remember that time they showed up at the hospital when they didn't have 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning? And I still want to be inspiring people. The legacy that I want to leave is a legacy that will live far after I'm gone. When people really are dead and gone, I want our message to keep on marching. That's what this church needs. We need to leave a mark. Even after we're gone, and our grandkids and our great-grandkids and our great-great-grandkids are sitting on this pew. We need people, young people that'll say, hey, I remember what great-granddaddy said. I remember what they left. They built a church here in Lepanto that was second to none. They lived a life that was holy. And if they can do that, oh, we can do it. And that message that you left, you may not have had a title. You may not have had any kind of glory. Oh, but that glory, that message that you left was still living. How what an awesome testimony, what an awesome impact that you can make. Right. Somebody shout with me. Somebody shout, bury me with the kings. Bury me with the kings. What if you're not a king? What if you don't have royal blood running through your veins? That's what some of you are sitting there saying in your mind. You're sitting there saying, you thought I was fixing to cut this thing short. We're going to get up to the altar, and we're going to dance, and we're going to thank God. We're going to be encouraged, we're going to be inspired. The fact is, some of you are saying, preacher, I'm not a king. I don't have royal blood running through my veins. I wasn't raised in a pastor's home like you. What do you do then? Some of you looking at me up here and you say, hey, you pretty little shirt, you pretty little jacket, you got your nice little shoes on. What happens when you don't have that? If you're not a king? What if you never become a king? Fact is, we can't all be kings. If life were a Hollywood film and we were making a feel-good story, then the right ending could be put in place. But this is real life. What happens then, preacher? I want to be remembered. I dream of leaving a legacy. But the fact is, I don't have all that going for me. What happens then? This was my dream of impacting over my legacy through. Talk to me. Tell me. Jehoiada was appointed priest by Joash. when King Joash and Jehoiada did the work of the service of the house of the Lord. And 2 Chronicles 24 and 14 says that they offered burnt offerings in the house of the Lord continually all the days of Jehoiada. He was no king. He never would be a king. That wasn't his gifting. He would have failed miserably at the ruling a nation. He was not a king. He couldn't do it. He didn't have that talent. God didn't anoint him to be king. But he took what he had to offer. And he said it wasn't much. I'm not going to be able to give everything that Jotham did. I'm not going to have the talents that Ahaz did. I'm not going to be the charismatic person that Uzziah was. But he said until he was 130 years old, he was going to make his mark on this world. And he said, until that, if I'm going to be priest, I may not be king. I may not have the title. But while I got what I got to offer, we're going to give praise unto God. And we're going to give worship unto God. And I may not be able to sing like her. Oh, but I can worship myself to death. I mean, I don't be able to preach like that young man. Oh, but I can dance before the Lord. And continually for 130 years, Jehovah said, I give myself. All right. So it comes time. He's dead. Jehoiada. They took Jotham. They put him with the kings. They took Uzziah. He impacted his world. They put him with the kings. What do we do with this priest's body? What do we do with Jehoiada? Do we throw him amongst the regular people? The average? What happens? Clearly he was not average. But he wasn't a king. What happens? The Bible records this. This is so powerful. When I read this the first time I ever read it, and I began to put this message together, I began to leap in my soul. Because there's some things that I've got dreams, Brother Noonan. There's some things that I want to achieve. And I'm looking and I'm saying, you know what? I don't have the past to be able to do that. I don't have necessarily the name to be able to do that. And when I read this, my heart began to leap out of my chest. And it was like God began to speak to me. They said, what do we do with him? He's not a king. Never happened before. And the Bible records, and they buried him in the city of David among the kings, because he had done good in Israel, both toward God and toward his house. I've come to tell somebody tonight, don't think for 1 second that you have to be a king to be remembered as one. Don't think for 1 second that you have to be a preacher to be remembered as a king. Don't think for 1 second that you got to have some wonderful talent or some wonderful gifting to leave a legacy. No, all you got to do is take what you have to offer and give it unto God continually. And when you die, they'll say, my God, that young lady was anointed. My God, that man had something powerful. He never preached a message, but I watched him continually give praise unto God, and I watched him be about his Father's business. All right. I wish everybody would stand to their feet right now and lift your hands and get inspired and get a dream in your heart. I'm telling you right now that God can move you, and you can't leave a mark, and you can't leave a legacy. All right. Somebody worship his name right now. God, we praise you and worship you, Lord. Thank you, Jesus. Thank you, Jesus. Thank you, Jesus. As they make their way on to the music, I'm not quite through yet. Just give me a little hope. I know I've preached a long time tonight. Don't think that you have to have a last name to leave a legacy. Don't think that you have to be a prophet to impact this